A cry of submission. Luke 23:46. And Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, said, Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. Father is a definite article that depicts the dynamic relationship that God and Jesus shared. If God is his Father, that necessitates that Jesus is the Son. The reason Jesus was condemned to death was because he was accused of blasphemy. In those days, to say that you were the son of was taken to mean that you were equal with, because your substance was identical to the one from whom you are derived. So Jesus was essentially crucified because of his relationship with God. Thus, by reason of the fact of your relationship with God, you will suffer. Notice, though, that even though Jesus was crucified because of his relationship to the Father, he didn't stop calling God Father. When his disciples were persecuted for his sake, they betrayed and denied him. But Jesus held fast to the very relationship that put him in his predicament. We, people of God, must be Jesus-type followers and not Judas-type followers. When Jesus said, into thy hands, he was referencing the extended faculty of the body equipped with the sensual impulse of touch. Hands are a physical and tangible part of the human body, and although they can hold many material things, they do not have the ability to hold the immaterial. The material hand does not have the capacity to hold the immaterial spirit. So when you find yourself in dire straits and circumstances, why do you put your faith in the physical hands of man as opposed to the hands of God? Why do we as Christians play faith for the spiritual in things that are natural and lack capacity to hold spiritual things? Why do the depressed drink alcohol? Why do the stressed smoke weed? Why do the hurting live promiscuously? Why do we assume human tactics can solve spiritual problems? Why do we pour the Dixie cup of our pain into other Dixie cups as opposed to the ocean? When he says hands, Jesus employs an anthropomorphism, which is ascribing human attributes to God, who is spirit. Anthropomorphisms are used in scripture to help us better understand what's being communicated. Note, not only is he not physical, but he doesn't have faculties. Part of God can't be in one place and another part of him in another place. Wherever he is, all of him is there. So then he's omnipresent and all present. Since God does not have hands, Jesus was essentially committing his spirit into God's person, which is so vast that it possesses the capacity to hold his spirit. My mama taught me this principle early in life when she taught me to pray, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. And if I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. And what that prayer was teaching me is the same thing Jesus displays on the cross. If God can give you solace and serenity in death, there is nothing he cannot aid you in. Death is the worst thing the enemy can throw at you, so if God has sovereignty over that, he has sovereignty over the pains of divorce, over the pains of foreclosure, over the pains of a lost loved one, over the pains of sickness, over the pains of shattered dreams. Although Jesus committed his spirit, that does not mean that his spirit was not already in the hands of God. For how could God, who is an everywhere very present help, not always have his son in his hands? How could God, who is the uncreated creator and the uncaused cause of everything, ever take anything he made out of his hands? God is so vast that his hands are everywhere, so by default they hold everything. For if God was to stop holding anything, he would stop holding everything. It would then cease to be God. And if God decided he no longer wanted to hold something in his right hand, it would automatically switch to his left hand. He holds the stars in their place until he decides to shoot them across the sky he drew without any crayons. He holds the sun in his hands without even having to use an oven mitt. He holds the devil in his hands and controls him like a marionette puppet or a dog on a leash. When he tells him to roll over, he rolls over. And when he tells him to sit down, he yields. And even when Jesus was on the cross, God had the whole scene in his hands. So you may be wondering, why would Jesus ask God to do something he was already doing? Because God wanted Jesus to remind himself through his own prayer that God held him in his hands. God knows what you need before you even ask, but requires that you ask for your own faith's sake. Furthermore, there's a difference from the person God holds automatically and the one he holds because he's been asked to. God just wants to know that you want him close and then wants you to pray so you can remind yourself that he's already close. Because Jesus committed his spirit, he felt secure enough to breathe his last. His verbal committal needed to be affirmed by a voluntary compliance. He couldn't truly commit his spirit to God if he kept breathing, because then his spirit would remain resident in his mortal body. But he willingly gave up his spirit, which was the works that validated his faith. Jesus said, nobody takes my life, but I lay it down. Which means he controlled when he died, but he wouldn't die until he had committed himself to God. The point is simply that when you commit your spirit to God, stop breathing. Before the committal, Jesus bore the pain of betrayal, denial, abandonment, abuse, mockery, slander, condemnation, and the cross. And with every succeeding breath, he continued to bear that pain alone. But when he committed it to God, he stopped breathing because it was no longer his to bear. So when you pray, stop pacing the floor. When you believe, stop boo-hooing. When you trust, stop tripping. When you commit your spirit, stop carrying your load. And when you drop that burden, stop breathing. The text says he breathed his last because in that context, it expresses how he released control of his situation. Sometimes you reach a level of pain so intense that it seems like you will never breathe the refreshing air of peace, joy, and gladness again. But when you think you breathed your last, God will give you breath again. The text says Jesus breathed his last, and if you close the book here, you'll think the hero's been defeated. But if you keep reading into the next chapter, you'll find out that our hero breathed again. Because when you die, you really live. When you lose your life for his sake, he'll give it back to you. When you stop breathing, God will give you breath again. I hear you asking, how did Jesus, after he stopped breathing, breathe again? Because when he died, God performed CPR. He ceased the power of death. He purchased back his creation. Then he resurrected his son from the dead. So whenever it seems like you've gone under to the point of no return, remember that God is removing sinfulness. He has a redemptive purpose, and he will resurrect your life, and you will breathe again. My son taught me this principle very vividly on Monday. He was 6 weeks old. We took him to the doctor to get his first shots. In order for him to get his shots, I had to hold down his hands with one hand and his legs with the other hand. After they shot him on both sides, he began to cry, and then I embraced him and told him, Daddy is here. The point is simply this: God will hold you down long enough until you can get what you need out of the cross that you're bearing. But as soon as you start crying, your Father in heaven will embrace you and will kiss you and will remind you that Daddy is here. It's nothing you got to worry about. All you got to do is commit your spirit to me. So tonight when you get home, fall on your knees with your face to the floor and say, God, into thy hands I commit my spirit. Not my hands, not my husband's hands, not my friend's hands, not my partner's hands, but into thy hands I commit my spirit.